Welcome, everybody. Today is Wednesday, the 3rd of February, 2021, and this is the Kubernetes Cluster API project meeting. Just a note before we start, we follow the Kubernetes community practices for meetings. So that means be excellent to each other and treat others as you might expect to be treated. If you'd like to speak during the meeting, please raise your hand and I will call on you. So to start with, looks like we have a couple service announcements. Jason, and then Warren and Fabrizio. So Jason, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that I recently did a talk and demo for the Kubernetes Atlanta meetup group around Cluster API Tinkerbell and the initial POC progress that we've made there. So if that's of interest to you, go ahead and check it out.
And just for context, Tinkerbell is the load balancer service?
No, Tinkerbell is a workflow engine for managing bare metal infrastructure. So it's the service that underlies the actual orchestration of the hardware that we provision at Equinix Metal.
Awesome. That's great, Jason. Thank you. Looks like Warren, you're up next. Maybe still typing, but if you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just calling for community help on the CAPI operator work. The CAP's already done, and I've sort of broken down most of the work that needs to go in. But yeah, if people, any community members were interested in this sort of high visibility, exciting sort of greenfield opportunity of building a CAPI operator for the providers, please reach out to me on Slack, and I'm happy to share all the context with you all. Cool.
That sounds great, Warren. I guess if you could toss a link to the CAP under that PSA too, that'd be awesome. And lastly, Fabrizio's got a PSA. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we are near the deadline for the KubeCon maintainer track submission. The deadline is Sunday. And as far as I know, there are no CAP talk, not for the main CAPI provider, not for the main CAPI repo, and not for provider. So yeah, it is a good opportunity for everyone to step up, and I think it is important for the project to showcase at KubeCon. So
I'm a little less familiar with what we've done in the past, but would we want to take an opportunity to give like another introductory type talk to CAPI, or are we kind of past that point at this time, I guess?
So we discussed this last week. So the idea for the main CAPI talk, if we are going to do so, is that probably, given that the CAPI exists since a few years now, we can take the opportunity to do maybe some deep dive on some new exciting feature instead of doing the usual project overview. But basically, this will be up to the people that volunteers for the call.
Okay, great. And it looks like Sunday is our deadline. So if people have ideas for talks, or maybe if you're out there listening and you would like to hear a talk, please reach out to Fabrizio or bring up something in our Slack channel. It would be great. Jason is saying in chat he'd be happy to collaborate on a submission, as well as I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. Yassine. All right, so that's the end of our service announcements. We'll get into discussion topics now. There's two at the moment. I added the first topic here, and this was basically just in response to something that Vince had asked in the Slack channel. So I guess there was some questions that come up about switching from Alpine to Debian for the image that we use for the CAPD provider, and that's the Docker provider, which is mainly used for a lot of our testing. And I think it's a great quick start way for beginners to get involved too. So I had kind of brought up like maybe we'd consider using the RHEL UBI image as a base for this as well, especially if security is a concern. And I realize this, UBI is probably not well known outside of the Red Hat community. So I just wanted to share some information about it. But UBI stands for Universal Base Image, and it is a RHEL Enterprise Linux-based container that Red Hat distributes for free. There's no extended subscription or licensing requirements to use it and to redistribute it as well. There are three kind of main flavors of this image. There's a kind of a standard that has most of the language runtimes and whatnot in it. And there's a minimal that has everything stripped out of it. And there's a multi-service that's kind of created in case you want to run two different or multiple processes in the same container. I put links to the images here. So if anybody wanted to download them and kind of play with them, please do. I've built a lot of stuff off of them. It's just kind of easy to do. You will be limited on the packages you can install through DNF, which is kind of the replacement for Yum in RHEL-based systems. And I put an asterisk at the end there because there is some weird stuff where if you're building from a RHEL UBI image on a RHEL hosted machine that's subscribed, you do have access to some other packages, but I don't think that's really relevant for what we're doing. And then there's also language specific runtime versions. So you can have, versions that have, Java or Node or Python, kind of baked in with the right binaries for them. I linked the FAQ here in case people had kind of more questions that I didn't get to. And as well as the product page for kind of the landing spot for that. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the basic intro. And I just wanted to offer it as, maybe another option we could think about if we're concerned about, security as one of the primary issues on these images. Yeah, I guess any questions people have?
So, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Yassine.
I have a quick question. So it's regarding our testing pipeline. I know that in KubeADM a while ago, we were thinking about doing some end-to-end tests on different distros. I wanted to check if this was specifically designed to be able to say use this as an image to test against, say, use RHEL, use Ubuntu, use other distros so that we can ensure that whatever distro we pretend to ship against, then it's tested.
That's a great question. And I see Fabrizio raised his hand. Did you have an answer for that, Fabrizio?
I can answer for the kubeadmin part. So in kubeadmin, we are not testing kubeadmin working with, against all the version out there. We are only testing on kind like Docker images. So they are based on Ubuntu. And that's for kubeadmin. So we are not basically testing against OS distros.
And Nadir also just raised his hand. Did you want to kind of chime in there?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Docker bit for cat D. So I know, because I'm a Fedora user myself, there's a emphasis on Podman and Creo. Cat D explicitly uses the Docker CLI. So I don't know if we have the Moby packages in the RHEL.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because I checked to see if we could get, in the RHEL packaging system, they've gone to the Moby name for all that stuff. So I was looking to see if we could install those binaries through the, the package manager, but it looks like not. So I'm guessing that we would have to just do what we do now or something similar to just install, downloading the binary and install it as part of the the Docker file. I did test out kind of pulling the binaries in and running them. And they run okay, but I didn't test out any kind of deeper functionality than that. So just to be clear, there will be some hurdles to kind of to get over if we were to use the UBI image, like some installing these binaries like, that, and then kubectl binary as well. We wouldn't get that from package manager. We'd have to install it by downloading it. And Jason brought up a good point in the Slack channel when we were discussing this, which was, there is probably going to be some unfamiliarity with the way that the rel image is laid out and kind of some of the security assumptions that are made, with respect to like security groups and whatnot inside the container. So those might be other limiting factors to consider if we talk about this.
What about legal? I mean, the UBI UBI EULA doesn't. I mean, this is an EFF approved license. I mean, is it even compatible with the rest of the Kubernetes world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. From the research that I did over the last couple of days, my understanding is that, we're free to use that image however we want, basically, including modifying and redistributing it. Where the licensing issues come in, there's a EULA for the image itself, but then there's also there are the licenses that come with all the software on that image, and all those licenses are the same. So the OSS licenses that are associated with the binaries that exist in that image, those come through just as we would expect them to. I didn't see anything in the EULA that would contradict the way we wanted to use it, though, because from everything I could tell, we're free to download that image and use it any way we want to, and then even redistribute versions of it that we build. So I couldn't find anything that specifically talked to that. And I see Vince is raising his hand. So Vince, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hi. The one thing why this came up is because Alpine had some CVEs lately. So like VMware is able to kind of security check like the latest Debian containers. And I've checked in other Kubernetes repos, and it's used a lot. It's also at the base of the Golang package, the Docker image. So it has a lot of there's a lot of use of Debian. So I'm not opposed to consider something like this, but probably as an additional testing layer rather than as a primary layer, if that makes sense. With regards to where it would run, we'll need to chat with test infra if we're okay, from a licensing perspective. But yeah, I'm happy to add on a different job that also test that if you want to have that signal. But let's make sure that on the licensing, we're 100% sure that we're not going to break anything. Yeah, we can run both pipelines if that makes sense.
I think that does make sense. And I can take an action item to kind of run this by our legal department just to make sure I haven't misrepresented any of the things in that EULA, because I took a read through it, but I'm just a software engineer. I'm not a lawyer. So I'll double check on that. I think what you're saying makes perfect sense. We probably do want to do what the rest of the community is doing. And if they're already using a different image they feel happy with, that's fine. I just thought, given the security talk that was brought up, this image does come through our enterprise kind of production line and everything. So it gets kind of the security treatment that most of the Red Hat stuff does. All that said, I think it would be amazing if we could have different, some different pipelines to show off kind of compatibility across different distros or whatever. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I guess any other questions or comments on this topic? Vince, I see your hand still up. Did you? Okay. All right. Well, if there's nothing else on this topic, why don't we move on to Nadir with a topic about consensus required for backporting.
Yeah, I just want to check. We've not yet merged that PR, so it's to do with the GCS bucket changes for Kubernetes CI release. Just want to check that we're all okay to backport that to the V1 Alpha 3 branch, so that the providers who are doing conformance testing on the V1 Alpha 3 branches of their providers can continue working as well.
Okay, so the ask here is just if anybody who's interested, maybe take a look at that PR and help out if possible. I guess, is there anything else on that topic, Nadir, or is that it?
That's it, really.
Okay, cool. Next up is Yassine with a topic about string processing post-cluster CTL templates. So take it away, Yassine.
So I wanted to discuss with y'all one of the upcoming requirements for the CPI, the Cloud Provider Integration, and the Kubernetes version sync. So SIG Cloud Provider is looking at harmonizing the versions of CPI and Kubernetes versions. So that might be impacting providers in general, since we're looking at moving to CPI-based cloud provider integration. So we will likely need a way to ensure that whatever gets set in the Kubernetes version is what gets set into the CPI. The only difference is that we will need to be in sync on the minor version only. The patch version can be basically is up to the CPI implementer to bump. Yeah, I wanted to check if like we would be recommending to our users to just have another environment, like just have another environment variable, or we could have something that checks that. One of the thoughts was basically to be able to extract the Kubernetes minor version and append it, but given that cluster cuddle currently doesn't allow to do any processing past the templating, that's kind of compromised for now.
Okay, I see Nadir has raised his hand. You want to get in here?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure cluster cuddle is the best place to even think about this, because then you think about upgrades as well, right? From minor release to minor release, you also want to manage the life cycle of the CPI, and you shouldn't be dependent on cluster cuddle to do that. Like, just it should be sufficient to change the Kubernetes version for the cluster, and then some sort of reconciliation to make sure the CPI is up to date. It feels like it's a bodge if we do anything in cluster cuddle.
I mean, Yassine, go ahead.
So it's not like to specifically tie this to or bake this into cluster cuddle, but the current state, at least, is that providers are installing the CPI through CRS. So as is, like, I guess it's going to depend on how soon this constraint is going to be rolled out. But if it's if it's happening now, we will likely need some stopgap measure for that to happen. And I saw that Vince said on chat, maybe KCP. So yeah, it's gonna like KCP makes sense once we have everyone out on CPI, I think.
I see there's a little talk going on in chat too, in case anyone's missing that. Vince was saying we should open a tracking issue. And I have a question, Yassine. Maybe I missed this when you said it before. What does CPI stand for in this reference?
It's the cloud provider integration.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I guess, are there any other questions or comments on this topic?
I'll just open an issue and then we can rally there.
Okay, I see Fabrizio just raised his hand. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think that what Nadir said about upgrade is really important here, because we don't have only care about installing the right version of the cloud provider during cluster creation, but then we have to make it sure that the version is consistent with the upgrades. And so we have to think how to make this work.
So I guess, is there an issue or a pull request we can link with this? Or I guess we need to make the tracking issue, I guess, and then maybe direct people there. Okay, great. Any other discussion on this topic? All right, then. Fabrizio, did you still have your hand up? Did you want to say something, or?
No, sorry, I just forgot to do.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I guess the last topic, Cecile talking about a timeline for deprecating the manager credentials. So take it away, Cecile.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is more of a question for providers than really like CAPI Corp, but I thought this was a good place to bring it up since most of us are here. So I was wondering, for those providers who are going to move to a multi-tenancy approach with per cluster credentials, what kind of timeline they had in mind for deprecating the use of the controller credentials? Because I know there was a PR in Kappa about adding like some sort of like permissions to ensure that like only some clusters are allowed to use the manager credentials. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up.
Nadir, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I commented on that PR. Basically in AWS land, there's actually kind of an ongoing use case to use controller credentials implicitly to jump between different AWS accounts. So they're not going away, but we still need to permission them somehow. So he's like, you will create an AWS management cluster, and that the Kappa controller is running with credentials provided by the cloud, and it can self-manage that own cluster. And then we need to stop users from being able to provision more clusters in that same AWS account. So I think we do need to modify that credential proposal to cover that use case, because I think it's something that we forgot. Basically, it was left over, but it doesn't apply to every provider, so I don't think it applies to Azure. So it's kind of, it will depend on the cloud basically, and we need to cover that particular use case.
Vince, why don't you go ahead?
And on the multi-tenancy approach, like something that like I like you all to kind of think about is like, if there are commonalities they would like to bring up in CAPI, maybe there aren't. So like maybe this is just like not a great idea, but if there are, like we should discuss like the timeline that Cecile like actually just brought up, as in like, do we want to bring resources up at the CAPI level to manage these credentials, and how? This will require a little bit more work, but it would be something more generic. Also, like if there are changes needed, for example, in cluster cuddle, or like potential breaking changes, just a reminder, like Alpha 3 is not going to be able to bring in breaking changes. So we need to think about like, what do we do in the short term for Alpha 3, and what we're going to do in the longer term. Personally, like this, the timeline that I like to propose is to find a stopgap solution today. Is like a problem that like can be solved, but try to find like a the proper solution for Alpha 4. So for that timeline, given that we have the other multi-tenancy issue, like you won't be able to create a new like controller at that point, or like in a manager scenario, at least like for if you use the operator or cluster cuddle. Does it make sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me. Fabrizio, you raised your hand.
Yeah, given that this is something that is popping up here and there, I think that we should basically keep in mind few aspects while discussing this. First of all, is that we should seek for a common experience across provider. Second is that we should take care both of the initial workflow and especially with the problem of the pivoting. Pivoting what we do with pivot credential or not, style like that. And last but not least, we should also consider if in the picture we want to do something for while we do upgrade, cluster cutoff upgrades from one version to the other. So there are many aspects to this problem, and I would like that we take care of addressing all of them.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some good concerns there. I think Nadir was next, and then Yassine.
Yeah, everything. I agree with everything Fabrizio said. That's all on my mind. I think we'll be able to address all of those. I think it's just a matter of updating the various documents in the right places. So it'll be a common multi-tenancy model and some optional features depending on the specifics of your cloud.
All right, Yassine.
Yeah, same for vSphere. We're looking to adopt the same multi-tenancy model, and I guess it might be interesting to start to brainstorm around some other use cases to see, for example, if the credentials get compromised, how's the user experience in terms of rotation and such.
Yeah, Cecile.
Yeah, plus one to what Fabrizio said. And I think the reason I bring up the timeline is also because of the fact that we want to have commonality between the providers. So if CABZ goes ahead and deprecates the manager credentials too early, like that might be confusing. So it'd be great if we can somewhat sync what we're doing across providers. But what we're thinking of doing for now is just having the credentials in the manager become optional in V1 Alpha 4. So right now they're required in Alpha 3, and we just added multi-tenancy support. So we're gonna make the credentials be completely optional so you can create a controller without credentials at all. But they can still be there as a fallback method if you still choose to do so.
Yeah, that to me, and I just started reading some of this multi-tenancy stuff today when Alberto pinged about the autoscaler stuff. But to me, as long as we need to make sure that we have a reasonable defaulting path that's still in place, that doesn't, like works outside of the multi-tenancy, because otherwise it's going to completely break the autoscaler with cluster API. So there needs to be kind of a default mechanism, and then we can ensure the autoscaler will work as we figure out how we're going to let the autoscaler, choose which credential to use or something. Or maybe that would be figured out on the cluster API side. I'm not sure. I did have a question about the multi-tenancy stuff, and I don't know if this came up during review, but is there any concern about like security issues related to possible disparate users sharing the same binary operator to do deployments of their machines? I'm just trying to think about the idea of an exploit perhaps leaking data from one machine to another, just something along those lines. Did this ever come up during the review?
I think that was sort of deferred in terms of the implementation detail for each. So the proposal literally went in a test provider, and it sort of documented how it would integrate with the SDK. So that it sort of started off as a proposal for a particular provider, and then we sort of made it more generic and was adopted for others. I certainly took it into consideration, and it was written with the way the SDK worked in mind. But yeah, I mean, anything we can do around static checking and security checks is good. If we can do improvements there, but it wasn't too concerning for there was like some of the caching mechanisms are reused in other projects like Kiam and stuff. So it wasn't completely like brand new in terms of implementation.
Okay. I mean, this is a question that's come up for us internally at Red Hat as we start to kind of, I guess, inch our way closer to CAPI deployment and whatnot. You know, and experimenting with these clusters that have shared controllers that might have multiple users deploying things from, you know, the same controller. So that was something that we had discussed about, you know, isolating the controllers from different users who might be using them to provision infrastructure. It sounded like it might touch on that a little bit, but thanks.
Yeah, I should add that internally, the proposal was reviewed by VMware Security. So it was actually designed to address, they didn't actually like the original model. They kind of wanted, they didn't want the proliferation of controllers on the Kubernetes cluster. So this is actually kind of to address something that they raised. So they did review the proposal, but we didn't have a code review.
Right, but in general, the idea of like sharing these controllers between multiple users who might be deploying infrastructure, they were okay with that model, basically.
Yeah.
Cool. David?
So as far as my perception of it goes, it isn't based on user though. It's really just based on namespace access. And if your cluster has access to, if your namespace is allowed to access the identity resource or the secret, then you have access. So it's not user based at all. Just to be very clear.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, and I'm playing a little loose with my use of the word user here. I guess I meant more like a user in the respect of like one party that's attempting to do action through the API or something like that. Nadir?
Yeah, so that was kind of explicit. So two things, because most people are retrieving a kube config through a secret, so they usually have access to get secrets from a particular namespace. So namespace really is the security boundary. Second, we based the entire multi-tenancy model was based off the services v2 model, which has had kind of a formal API review. So it's had people like look at it. So it's a copy of that model, which is why I was sort of reasonably confident it would be okay. But yeah, that's basically the intent behind it.
Okay, I mean that's awesome. Yeah, it's encouraging to hear all that, and you know, please don't get me wrong. I'm not questioning the review work of others here. I trust that this has gone through you know, good design practice. I'm just kind of asking for my own curiosity. Vince?
Yeah, just wanted to identify some action items here. Like, do we have anybody that is available to track this work for all providers and bring a proposal in Cluster API for Alpha 4, which is Q2?
Sorry, proposal
That's a great
for
question.
which part?
Sorry, I couldn't hear both.
A proposal for which part?
For the multi-tenancy, like either a proposal, a timeline or something, like let's come to a decision like what we want to do within Alpha 4, because I've heard like multiple times like maybe we want to do this upstream, but there's like some specific items that like, you know, are infrastructure provider specific. So identifying those and what we can bring upstream as a new API would be immensely helpful. Or maybe we just do it in the providers, but then the user experience has, you know, has some drawbacks that like it might not be the similar.
Nadir?
Yeah, Fabrizio already made that start of writing that document. So it's already merged. So I think it's just a case of updating it based on this sort of latest conversation and making sure we're all on the same page more than anything else.
I guess my question was like, are we trying to introduce new types in Cluster API for this or not at all?
Not Cluster API level. These are recommended contracts for provider implementations rather than Cluster API level resources.
Okay, I guess, are there any other questions or comments around this topic? I guess maybe Nadir, can we link that doc here if it's public, I guess?
Yep, I'll gather them all.
Awesome, thank you. So I guess if there are no more questions or comments about this, we've reached the end of our topics for today. I guess give a minute if anybody would like to add anything at the last minute or say anything to the group. All righty, well, if not, I guess we'll get back about 22 minutes of our day here, and hope you all have a nice week.
Later, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.